what we've seen to this point helps us understand this idea that Europeans had used to justify their imperialism, their colonialism, and that it was their somehow responsibility as Europeans and as white people to build these empires and conquer all of these people. And that brings us to the clearest statement of this thing, which comes to us from Rudyard Kipling, his 1899 poem, White Man's Burden. And he's writing this to encourage the United States to join in on empire building and colonization. And specifically here, he's encouraging the United States to keep control of the Philippines that it has taken as a result of defeating Spain in the Spanish-American War of 1898. And he's using this poem to explain why America should do this and what is likely in store for America. But he's also telling this story not just to the Americans and not just for the case of the Philippines, but this poem encapsulates all of these European ideas about their civilizing mission and how they told themselves they were doing it for the good of the people they conquered, and that it was ultimately for their benefit and came at the expense of the Europeans. It was not something that they were doing to enrich themselves. So here we go with the poem. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed. Go send your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, or you caught sullen peoples, half their half child. Take up the white man's burden, patience to abide, veil the threat of terror, and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, seek another's profit, and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his old reward. The blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard. The cry of hosts and humor fall slowly into the light. I brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian might. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days. The lightly proffered laurel, easy ungrudged praise, comes now to search your manhood from all the thankless years. Cold edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of the fears. Now, we need to unpack that poem a bit. Talk about some things that we see there and how they connect to this justification for empire building and colonialism. Does show us is that Europeans saw what they were doing in building empires and taking over colonies as things that were done by their best people. In Rudyard Kipling's poem, he refers to sending the best ye breed, who are not only the best of your people, but remember, he's telling the Europeans, these are your own sons that you're sending off to build empire. And you're doing this selflessly. He says you're doing it to seek another's profit and work another's gain. And it's not easy work. He refers to it as the toil of serf and sweeper. To build the ports you shall not enter, the roads you shall not tread. So you're doing it for other people. It's hard work that doesn't benefit you, and it is also costly work. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Reminding Europeans, and of course he was also, his big part of his audience for this was the United States. And he was calling on the United States to take up the white man's burden. And he's saying that lots of you are going to die in the process.
And you're not going to get any thanks from the people that, as he sees it, you're trying to help. He refers to these inferior colonized people, as they were seen by Europeans, as being half devil and half child. Who were slothful, lazy, and heathen, meaning here to be not Christian, not civilized. And so therefore, right, their heathen folly, their heathen mistakes, right, are going to mess up everything you're trying to do. And they're going to blame you when it goes wrong. The blame of those you better, the hate of those you guard. The cry of hosts ye humor, slowly toward the light. Why brought you us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Okay. Here, this is a biblical reference. When Moses led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt and they had to go into the desert, they complained that he had done this. They said, we were better off as slaves in Egypt. Why didn't you just leave us there? He's saying that colonized people will treat you the same way. Why didn't you just leave us the way we were instead of trying to make our lives better? Right, so we're going to screw everything up, and then we're going to blame you for it and tell you we wish you just left us alone. And so we get images, well, one like this. This elderly queen is Spain trying to hold on to the Philippines with one hand and Cuba with the other. This kind of pro-imperialist British political cartoons shows, this is probably Columbia, is how it was often referred to in Columbia, the one spelled like Columbia, Missouri, right, representing liberty and civilization, leading British settlers and soldiers to go save these poor native people from barbarism. And here, right, we have the British carrying some of their conquered people, the Chinese, for example, in the United States, now joining to carry Native Americans or Filipinos up the rocks of ignorance and vice and brutality and barbary all the way to civilization. I mean, these were the ideas. There were also cartoons portraying Uncle Sam as a schoolmaster trying to teach Cuba and Puerto Rico and Hawaii and the Philippines to be civilized like those white girls and boys in the other part of the room. And notice the African American is only in the school building to wash the windows. And the Native American is set over in a corner. Those are the images that we get. We will leave off there. Of course, there is no exit slip today. We left off talking about the ideas that I kind of lumped together and called the white man's burden. And those racist views, which did build on some Enlightenment ideas and some Enlightenment thinkers, drove this massive growth of empires. So as this animated map is going to show, here we are in the area of globalization 1.0. This is farther into it. We can see more and more territory. And then 1914, at the end of our era, that is what we get. And that is, a freeze frame of 1914. Remember, the Americas are largely cut off from European colonization and empire building, although Canada does belong to the British Empire at this point. France has these huge areas in Africa. It also has territory in Southeast Asia, most notably what will be Vietnam. And the Brits have these large areas in Africa, South Asia, on out to Australia and New Zealand. To recap some of our objectives to understand where we have been. By now, we know the components of globalization. We know the key characteristics of the stages we've looked at so far. We know what has enabled it, especially since our focus has been on Globalization 1.0. Today, we are going to turn to the motivations for Globalization 1.0. And here, we're going to be talking about motivations that support globalization. Opposition, unfortunately, we're going to run out of school year. And I know, for you, you don't care at all, and that's not unfortunate or sad in any way, shape, or form, and that's fine. It's totally reasonable. Sad for me, because it means we also won't get to talk about the consequences or get to do those very big picture things that I would have liked to have done. But at least we will get to talk about motivations. And that means the 3 G's, God, gold, and glory, are back. And this should be picking up on page 75. And no, in case you're wondering, that's not Obi-Wan Kenobi up there. That's supposed to be a depiction of Jesus. There's occasionally been confusion on that point. It also explains why my office mate, who was from Ghana, used to call me Jesus for fun. Because when he was a boy, Ghana was still a British colony, and they put pictures of Jesus up, paintings of Jesus, not like photographs of Jesus. Those don't exist. Paintings of Jesus in all of the schoolrooms. And apparently that's how they painted him. All right, we're going to look at each in order. And remember, God is shorthand for saying religion as a motivator. This was a time when the number and size of missionary societies exploded. And they were mostly Protestant in this time period, which makes this different than the age of exploration, which largely served to spread Catholicism, right? And mainly Americas. And the motivation here was a desire to save souls. And I know previously when we have talked about religion as a motivator, it's been often something that many of you have seen, and justifiably so, as kind of a cover for some other motive. But for a lot of these missionaries, this really was their motivation. Yeah, Tuan. So I can't because they're doing makeup EOCs in the freshman building today. Sorry, Tuan. Oh, that's okay. I hadn't said anything, and I didn't initially know. Are they not doing it? Okay, well then when Breeston gets back, you can. All right. Thank you for the update. This is kind of an example of that motive. They were really trying, because the thought of a lot of these missionary societies, especially since they're Protestant, is, if we don't save these people by converting them to Christianity, right, they will go to hell. And so maps like this were meant to be very alarming. Protestant Christianity represented by the yellow areas of the map, red being Catholic, green being Muslim, And then they point out as the biggest box and in the boldest letters, right, the heathen, people who didn't have any of those religions. And that population was over 800 million, which was a huge chunk of the world's population at that time. It would still be big now, but back then there were far fewer people on Earth. Religion played a role not just as a motivator, but in terms of how it shaped globalization. It did so in several ways. The most obvious, of course, is that it spread Protestant Christianity. But it also spread European languages. Via missionaries. Now, missionaries did learn indigenous languages in many cases, and they would, in doing so, create translations of the Bible into other languages. But they also taught European languages. They also spread other elements of culture. And one of those is a European standard of modesty. And here by modesty, I don't mean being humble and not bragging about yourself, right? Modesty in terms of clothing. And right, as this image shows, we have the Western missionary going out, the women with their long sleeve, long skirt, high neck outfits, going to preach to and convert, right, half dressed or half naked, depending on how you want to see it, indigenous people. And it was more than that. I mean, this was partly the time when ideas that men should wear suits and things spread around the world. Okay? And this European suits with suit jackets and all of that, ties, spread around the world, even to places where it is horribly inappropriate because of the weather, right? Where it might be 100 degrees and 90% humidity. And yet you've got somebody trying to wear a wool suit with a long sleeve shirt and a necktie. Religion, even if it started off as a genuine motive, did in many cases and for many people get tied to imperialism and colonization. For the British, an example of this was the notion of the Bible and the flag, which you can see represented in this postcard. Our flags, and united we stand all together, all these parts of the British Empire for faith, and there's your connection to the Bible, and of course, king and empire. It also happened notably for the United States and its growing empire in Hawaii. The missionaries, or at least their descendants, became sugar plantation owners. They became very economically powerful. The native Hawaiian government didn't like this. And to prevent any kind of limits on their economic power, those American sugar growers pushed for the U.S. to annex Hawaii. And actually, what they did was they got the U.S. to undertake a military coup to overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy and impose white rule on Hawaii, which is what is symbolized here. We've got the sugar grower, right, overseeing this shotgun wedding between Uncle Sam and Hawaii. And just to make sure we know, annexation means adding a foreign territory to your country. Doesn't mean it becomes a state. I mean, of course, Hawaii ultimately did. But other places we've annexed, like Puerto Rico, are still territories and do not have statehood. Okay, Tuan is up. Shifting to gold, things get a little more complicated. There are three different perspectives here, and we may not get through all of them. And we're going to start with mercantilism, right? Even if it was a thing that David Ricardo and Adam Smith preached against, it was still a big motivation. Powerful imperial countries like the British, like the French, and later the Germans, wanted to be autarkies. And they wanted to not be dependent on foreign imports, or just not even forget dependent. They didn't want to import even things that were non-necessary. Because this is still a time period when international trade is conducted in gold. If you're buying imports, gold is leaving your country and going to somebody else. At the same time, they still wanted to be exporters, right, so that they can sell stuff to other countries and get their gold. And empires helped make this possible. For one, if there's a raw material that you need and you don't have, well, you can take over a territory that does have it. And then you can turn those raw materials into more valuable manufactured goods. You can sell them to other countries to get their gold, but you also can sell them to your own colonies. That's what's symbolized by this poster. Empire products for Britain, so we should see the unloading of raw materials, and then the export of British manufactured goods going back to the empire. So what you do is you get the people in the colonies to give you the cheaper raw materials, and then you sell them back more valuable finished goods. And of course, what's not shown here is that by keeping things in the empire, you keep out foreign imports. Now, before you criticize the British Empire, well, actually, before we get to that, here's some other illustrations of this, the Be British and Buy British campaign. And then this also shows us the relationship. The Queen representing the mother country of the United Kingdom, right, and the colonies as the servants providing raw materials, food, and of course that bullion, the gold and silver. But don't judge them too harshly as mercantilists who haven't seen the light. America, right, still does the same kind of thinking. Right? Keep out imports from other countries, build things ourselves, find our own resources at home and use those. And it's also not new, right? We can go way back before Trump's term started in 2016. 2017, or Biden's in 2021. This has long been the policy. This political cartoon shows U.S. sugar growers putting up a tariff wall to keep out cheaper sugar imports from Cuba. The only way through is to be annexed, like Hawaii was. We move to our second one, and this is kind of the weird one, because it's going to sound kind of counterintuitive. We need to talk about the problems of capitalism, or at least in theory. And to know this, we need to know about the theory of Karl Marx. Which is, of course, Marxism. And according to Marxism, Societies in capitalist countries are defined by their class conflict between, on the one hand, the bourgeoisie or capitalists. These are the people who own what Marxists call the means of production. They own the resources, they own the factories that can turn those resources into things to sell. They are able to buy the work of their employees, referred to as labor, very cheaply. In a moment, we'll talk about why they're able to buy it cheaply. They're also a tiny minority. I mean, if it helps to think about it this way, you can use like the terminology of U.S. politicians like Bernie Sanders. These would be your 1%. The other class is the proletariat, or the working class. And they have to sell their labor cheaply because that's all they have. They don't own the means of production. And because they only have one thing to sell, they don't have a lot of bargaining power to demand much for it. They're also the overwhelming majority of the population, which means if you are a member of the working class, you are out there trying to sell your labor just like almost everybody else. Sorry, wrong button. If you don't want to take the job because you think the pay is too low, somebody else will, right? And the capitalists or the bourgeoisie know it. This class conflict and the capitalist mode of production made up what Karl Marx referred to as the base of society. Everything else rises out of the base, and he called it the superstructure. To kind of think about that, think of an aircraft carrier. Right? You've got the big body of the ship, you have the giant flat top, and then somewhere towards the center, you have that big tower sticking up over the deck. Okay? That's on an aircraft carrier called the superstructure. So same kind of idea here. Right? The base is what holds up the superstructure. The superstructure includes the politics and government of a society, and the government is on the side of the bourgeoisie. Next year, when you take U.S. history, you're going to see examples where state and federal troops were used to break up strikes by American workers. Yeah, and some of those strikes were violent and involved workers using weapons to take over factories. But still, the government comes down on the side of the capitalists. But it's also in culture and art. The culture and art, according to Marx, reinforce the values of the bourgeoisie. Like this painting portrays the bourgeoisie as the very respectable, good kind of people that you should look up to and listen to. And that they are responsible for bringing you all of these other good things, like the boats that bring trade and bring food, the businesses where you can buy stuff. Why the children look like little tiny miniature old people, I don't know. I can't tell you if that's part of the program or not, but that's how they did it. Even education, and to be clear, I'm not trying to start a proletarian revolution at Central High School, but Marx pointed out that education reinforces, right, the system. I mean, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. At Central High School, you can take classes in business to teach you how to be a capitalist. What you can't take is a class on how to be a labor organizer to unionize a business. much less a class on how to be a Marxist revolutionary. He even said it went to the level of religion and philosophy. Probably one of the most famous quotes people know from Marx is Religion ist das Opium des Volkes, which is religion is the opium of the people, or the opiate of the people, depending on your translation. And the idea here is that, like actual opium, religion kind of makes people forget about their pains and their cares. That was Marx's thought, right? Is that religion had people thinking about, right, the heaven that came after this life, instead of focusing on the suffering they were enduring in this one. To this point, it sounds like the bourgeoisie have everything locked down. But there's a problem. Even if it sounds like they're all on the same team, they're not. They have to compete with each other. When Marx is writing, businesses were primarily industrial. Right? They made things to sell. And if you want to sell things, having the best price is a good way to do it. So they have to cut costs. And one of the ways you can do that is to replace workers with machines. Then you don't have to pay so many workers, which is fine as far as it goes, but as you continue to fire more and more workers, you have fewer people with money to be consumers that purchase your products. Which means that the bourgeoisie try to cut costs by automating even more. And this creates a vicious cycle. Falling prices, cost cutting. Falling prices, cost cutting. Replacing workers with machines, having fewer workers making money to buy stuff. And this was what Marx was sure was coming. And he assumed that there were going to be basically these armies of unemployed, primarily unemployed men. And this is a scene from the American Great Depression, where local chambers of commerce did put up signs like this, telling these unemployed men who were traveling around the country, sometimes by hopping trains, to just keep moving on. Right? There weren't enough jobs for the people who already lived there. This vicious circle was supposed to reach a critical point, critical mass or tipping point, whatever you want to call it, which would bring about the proletariat revolution. And because the proletariat are the overwhelming majority of the population, they would win. And they would replace a capitalist economy with a communist one. Right? And economy and society would be the same thing, and they would all be driven by this fundamental idea: from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But the revolution never happened. Well, really, I mean, it's never happened. It has never worked out the way Marx thought it would be, even though we have had communist countries like the Soviet Union, China. Don't shut down your notes yet, guys. We're almost there. The reason that there wasn't a revolution is the reason that we're talking about Marxism in a lesson about the economic motivations for Globalization 1.0. A follower of Marx named Vladimir Lenin, that guy, argued that the revolution wasn't happening because of imperialism. And he said imperialism was the highest stage of capitalism. And that didn't mean like the strongest or the best stage. It meant the final stage of capitalism. As long as the major capitalist countries could conquer new territories as colonies and get raw materials from them, and have those colonies as markets like the British did to sell back their manufactured goods. As long as you could do those two things, you could postpone the revolution because you were finding new ways to get cheaper things you needed and new people to sell your stuff to. So in other words, the problems of capitalism in globalization, in the period of Globalization 1.0, drove its imperialism. Yeah, so this is another way of explaining what looks like countries following mercantilism. They might think that's what they're doing, but what they're really doing is following the necessities of class conflict. Okay, and we will stop our notes there. And I will just collect your Map Pack 10 on your way out the door. So what this boils down to is the inherent flaws in capitalism, as Marxists see them, right, drove the imperialism during Globalization 1.0. But right, Smith and Ricardo did also have something to say about what motivated globalization. There was evidence of globalization by free trade. Now, these things all coexisted together. The Brits were certainly mercantilist in a lot of ways, and so was the United States. But despite of that, both of them often worked to increase free trade. Thank you. And one of the biggest examples of this was the open door policy in China. Of course, even there, we can't avoid some racism. There's the representation for the English, Uncle Sam, and then Japan has to be the little dog in the middle. Hello, this is Brown. Okay, I will do it. Bye. All right, head on up to the security hut, or the airlock, whatever you want to call it, up front. Okay. And the UK's Royal Navy did go to a lot of expense to protect the sea lanes for trade. Of course, that was good for the Brits because most of the trade was theirs, but it also kept the sea trade routes open for other countries like the United States or Japan or even England's or the UK's frequent rival, France. And it was central to British ideas of their empire. One king, one flag, one fleet, and one empire. That was kind of the pride of the British, was the Royal Navy. And finally, there is glory. It's easy to think about talks of glory as being just that, right? Just fancy talk. But imperial bragging rights were tremendously important, both to leaders and to their publics. The UK famously boasted, right? And anyone you asked could tell you that theirs was the biggest empire, and it was so big that there was always some part of it in daylight. And then very personally, as we look at one particular leader, Kaiser Wilhelm II, when the Europeans were carving up borders in Africa, reports, the border did a weird zigzag around Mount Kilimanjaro, allotting Africa's tallest peak to the Kaiser. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, had the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas and any other number of big mountains. The Kaiser had none and wanted a big mountain of his own. Now, that may just sound ridiculously childish, but that was important, right? Having bragging rights about your empire was something that leaders wanted to have. Of course, Queen Victoria also got to brag that she had the world's biggest, fanciest diamond, the Kohinoor diamond, which had been taken from India. And so we can think of empire as a status symbol, like driving a Cadillac Escalade or a BMW 700 series. Yeah, go ahead. And then, of course, as I did say, it mattered to the public as well. So it would be plastered on special edition postage stamps like this one from Christmas of 1898. We hold a vaster empire than has been. Or this map that was put up in schoolrooms all over the place to show school children where the British Empire was. And then, as I said, the ever famous an empire on which the sun never sets. Okay, we will stop there. You need to give me map pack number 10 on your way out the door to lunch. Sorry to hear that, Dalton. That one? That's okay.